Mic test for the reporter. Test, test, test. Witness mic check, witness mic check.
The Defense Subcommittee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will receive testimony from the Honorable Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, General Mark Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Undersecretary Mike McCord, the Department's Comptroller and CFO. The Department of Defense is requesting $825 billion with this subcommittee's in the subcommittee's jurisdiction. It's a modest increase from fiscal year 23, particularly as we enter the middle of a decisive decade for security and prosperity of our nation and the world. In many ways, the Biden administration has put the United States at a serious disadvantage. First, a short-sighted political decision to conduct a hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan, resulting in a rapid resumption of power by the Taliban. The return of a permissive operating space for al-Qaeda, a strategic failure of geopolitical competition, and ultimately the tragic loss of 13 U.S. service members at Abbey Gate. One of the brave Americans lost that day was Lance Corporal Kareem Nakui, my constituent. He should never have happened. I'm still waiting for a sliver of accountability from this president and an answer to when the people who orchestrated this attack will be brought to justice. This is to say nothing of the thousands of unvetted Afghans allowed to depart the country for U.S. and allied soil, some of which may be the thousands of terrorists released from the prison at Bagram Airfield. Secretary Austin, these events have made the world a more dangerous place. Moreover, the administration's concept of integrated deterrence failed to deter Putin from invading Ukraine and waging the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. It's well documented that President Biden and his national security team knew that Russia would invade months in advance. Frankly, there was an open source information that foreshadowed the invasion. The administration had an opportunity, before a single shot was fired, to rally NATO, arm Ukraine, and make clear to Putin and his thugs that Russian aggression toward a sovereign Ukraine would come at a tremendous cost to them. But the Biden National Security Team failed to act quickly, and today they continue to compound this error by giving Ukraine just enough assistance to survive, but not enough to win. Even today, as Russia and Ukraine prepare for spring offensives, the administration has testified that it's not requesting additional funding. By our assessment, however, your remaining presidential drawdown authority for security assistance will only last another 2 to 3 months. I want to be clear, Congress will not be writing blank checks. It's important that you communicate future requests for funding for Ukraine clearly, thoroughly, and early. Congress will need sufficient time to review and ask questions on any requests submitted. In isolation, the failings I detailed are unconscionable, but events do not happen in a vacuum. The administration's continued failure to anticipate and implement a coherent geopolitical strategy that is now compounded by China's rapid modernization and preparations to attempt to reclaim Taiwan in this decade. Weakness is provocative, and this administration weakness has emboldened authoritarians around the world. Today, China, not the United States, is brokering peace negotiations in the Middle East. The U.S. is losing influence as the world's partner of choice, and the reason is all too clear. In terms of our own modernization, too many of our weapon systems are delayed due to the status quo, risk-averse mindset, the bureaucracy of the procurement process, and the lack of consistency for our defense industrial base. By the assessment of some senior defense officials and military leaders, a modernized U.S. force in 2030 will arrive too late to deter a forced reunification of Taiwan by the Chinese Communist Party. As General Douglas MacArthur famously said, the history of failure in war can be summed up in 2 words: too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparing, too late in uniting all possible forces of resistance. 2 words, too late. We must be ready to fight tonight and rapidly modernized to maintain the world's greatest fighting force, To pick one over the other is a false choice. I do not want to be the chairman presiding over World War III. I hope to hear how this budget changes China's increasingly aggressive behavior today, not tomorrow, or in 2030. With a budget of over $800 billion, 3.4 million employees, and a fiscal presence of over 4,000 sites in 160 countries, the Department of Defense is also the world's largest business. I expect the department to implement efficiencies and identify cost-saving measures in its business operations. Today, the DoD relies on too many antiquated systems that cannot talk to each other and too many manual processes. These outdated systems and processes lead to unsuccessful financial audits, duplication of effort, a frustrated workforce where top talent is difficult to retain, and unsustainable trajectory for personnel costs. And this year, you are requesting 3,500 net more people. For what? The same department that developed sixth-generation fighters is running a second-generation IT system, and the resulting inefficiencies are eating into the department's ability to invest in the future. Regardless of the challenges we face internally and externally, I will ensure that our service members and their families have the best quality of life we can afford, and they have the best equipment possible. So if we do get into a fight, we win, they lose. That's it. Before we hear from our witnesses, I would like to recognize the distinguished ranking member, Ms. McCollum, for any opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the courtesy. I would, too, like to welcome Secretary Austin and General Milley and Undersecretary McCord. General Milley, this could be your last appearance before the subcommittee, so I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the families of Minnesota's 4th Congressional District and myself to thank you and your family for your 43 years of dedicated service to our nation. For fiscal year 2024, the President has proposed $825.3 billion within our subcommittee's jurisdiction. That is a 3.2% increase above what was enacted in fiscal year 2023. This budget request builds on the work of the last Congress that ensured America meets our pacing threats and meets the needs of our servicemen and women and their families. This modest increase proposal for fiscal year 2024 is consistent with the National Defense Strategy. I would like to point out that if we review the growth of the defense bill over the past 2 fiscal years, we see a nearly $100 billion increase, or we could call it 11.8%. Each one of these dollars represents an increased effort to defend, deter threats to our nation. But I would argue that we have more than adequately resourced the Department of Defense in recent years. We must be both realistic and careful about the continuing trend of inflation defense spending well beyond this administration's request. Congress must be better about making the hard choices when it comes to the defense budget. We can no longer continue to fund out-of-date legacy systems that are no longer relevant, not survivable, or too costly to maintain in both dollars and cents. And the personnel required to maintain them could be better used in our modernization efforts. Instead, we must prioritize the modernization of our force and the investments in emerging technologies like quantum computing, artificial intelligence that will drive decision-making and the future of modern combat. The Appropriations Committee must also remember we're only as strong abroad as we are here at home. The previous Congress and the Biden administration made 2 years of key investments in the American people: transportation, clean energy, healthcare, education, and workforce development. If we fail to continue investing in the American people, then will we not only fail the next generation of Americans, but we will be unable to capitalize in the investments in our defense budget that require a strong American workforce. If we want to support the continued investments in our shipyards, aerospace industry, our microelectronics industry base, we must be sure that we are investing in the inputs and support those industrial efforts, and that simply is our people. To put it plainly, we cannot afford to fund the defense bill on the backs of the 11 other appropriation bills. And speaking of here at home, I want to commend Secretary Austin and the department for the recent reproductive health care policy decision. The department's policy is legal, it's fair, and it will provide our service women and their families the health care that they are entitled to. Turning back to the FY24 defense budget, I was encouraged to see the increase for climate change efforts. Resiliency at our installations is vital to our ability to train and to win. As this request works to track industry trends and standards, I look forward to hearing how the funds will empower our military in the future. And finally, you know how concerned I am about your efforts in the Arctic and the challenges we face from our adversaries there. I look forward to hearing how this budget will support the strategies not only in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, but how it will address threats in the Arctic. And Mr. Chair, I know how deeply impacted you were by the loss of your constituent at Abbey Gate. But I have to point out, it was the Trump administration, not President Biden, that negotiated the deal with the Taliban to withdraw our forces from Afghanistan. And I personally believe that if President Trump had been reelected, that there was little doubt he would have pulled our troops out early in 2021. Mr. Chair, I look forward to working with you. Once again, I thank Secretary Austin, General Milley, and Undersecretary McCord for your service to this country and for appearing here today. I thank you again for the courtesy, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. It's my pleasure now to recognize the chair of the committee, Ms. Granger.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before us today. Every year, senior defense officials testify that the world is the most dangerous it has ever been. Unfortunately, that trend continues today. Our enemies have become more bold and in many cases more capable. Russia is waging an all-out war against the people of Ukraine. China continues to take provocative steps in the Pacific and spread its influence around the world. Iran is reportedly making significant strides in developing a nuclear weapon. And just last week, North Korea tested what they say is their largest intercontinental ballistic missile to send a message to the United States and our allies. The events over the past year emphasize why it's essential that Congress provide the funds to ensure we're ready for war. However, just putting money toward a problem is not going to be enough. The funds must be spent and invested thoroughly. We must do everything possible to break through the red tape and create a more responsive military. To do that, we need to remove the barriers that prevent us from quickly developing and implementing cutting-edge technology. We owe it to the men and women of our military to give them the tools they need to deter our enemies and to enter the fight when necessary. Most importantly, we need leadership. As Chairman Calvert mentioned, the actions of this administration have put our national security at risk, have our allies wondering if they can trust us, and have shown weakness in our enemies. To close, I thank each of you for your service. We look forward to hearing your testimony today, and I thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Chair Granger. Gentlemen, your full testimony will be placed in the record. Members of the subcommittee are eager to get to questions, so please give a brief summary of your statements. Secretary Austin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, sir. Chair Granger, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, distinguished members of the committee. I'm glad to be with you today to testify in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024. I'm joined, as always, by General Milley, and I remain grateful for his leadership. I'm also glad to be joined by the department's comptroller and CFO, Mike McCord. This is a budget aimed squarely at keeping America secure in the world of the 21st century. At $842 billion, it is a 3.2% increase over fiscal year 23 enacted, and a 13.4%, and it's 13.4% higher than fiscal year 22 enacted. This is a strategy-driven budget and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. This budget will help us continue to implement our 2022 National Defense Strategy and the President's National Security Strategy. Now, I have three key priorities at the Pentagon: to defend our nation, to take care of our outstanding people, and to succeed through teamwork. And the PRC is our pacing challenge, and we're driving hard to meet it. Our budget builds on our previous investments to deter aggression by increasing our edge. We're investing in a more resilient force posture in the Indo-Pacific and increasing the scale and scope of our exercises with our partners. And this budget includes a 40% increase over last year's for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and it's an all-time high of $9.1 billion. Now, that will fund a stronger force posture, better defenses for Hawaii and Guam, and deeper cooperation with our allies and partners. Now, this budget also makes the department's largest ever investments in both R&D and procurement. We're requesting more than $61 billion to sustain our air dominance, and that includes funding for fighters and the extraordinary B-21 strategic bomber that I helped unveil last December. We're also seeking more than $48 billion in sea power, including new construction of 9 battle force ships. And we're boosting capacity at America's shipyards to build the ships that our strategy demands. And we're investing a total of $1.2 billion in the submarine industrial base. And we're buying 2 Virginia-class attack submarines and 1 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine. On land, we're investing in air and missile defense, and we're investing in defenses to counter unmanned aerial vehicles. We're also requesting $11 billion to deliver the mix of long-range fires that our security demands, including major investments in hypersonics. We'll also continue to modernize all 3 legs of our nuclear triad and bolster our strategic deterrence. And we put forward the largest space budget in Pentagon history. We've requested $33.3 billion to improve our capabilities, our resilience, and our command and control in space. Now, let me again thank Congress for providing the department with multi-year procurement authorities and appropriations for critical munitions. This helps send a consistent demand signal to industry. In this budget, we're requesting more multi-year procurement authority, and we're asking for more than $30 billion to invest in the industrial base and to buy the maximum number of munitions that American industry can produce. This budget also moves us away from aging capabilities that aren't relevant to future conflicts, so we can focus on the advances that warfighters will need going forward. Now, our national defense strategy calls out Putin's highly aggressive Russia as an acute threat. And under President Biden's leadership, the United States has rallied the world to help Ukraine fight Russia's unprovoked and indefensible invasion. And our allies and partners have stepped up to provide crucial security assistance, coordinated through the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that I lead. And we will support Ukraine's defense for as long as it takes. And meanwhile, the department remains vigilant against other persistent threats, including Iran, North Korea, and global terrorist groups. And we're investing in over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities as well. This budget also invests in improving our readiness and resilience in the face of climate change and other 21st century threats that don't care about borders. And Mr. Chairman, we're going to remain the strongest military in the world, and that's because we have the best team in the world. And as we mark the 50th anniversary of our all-volunteer force, I'm enormously proud of the brave men and women who choose to wear the cloth of our nation. We owe it to them and their families to take the best possible care of all of our people. And over the past 2 years, we've made moves easier, we've cut commissary prices, we've made child care more affordable, and expanded job opportunities for military spouses. And this budget funds other key steps to increase the quality of life for our teammates, including the largest military and civilian pay raises in decades. Now, we're also pushing hard to eliminate suicide in our ranks, including immediate steps to hire more mental health professionals and improve access to mental health care. And meanwhile, we're working toward a military that's free of sexual assault, We've worked with Congress to improve the response to sexual assault and related crimes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And those reforms will be fully implemented by the end of this year. And the department is also investing in a specialized workforce to combat sexual assault, harassment, suicide, and more. And on many installations, we're conducting on-site evaluations that tell us what's working and where more support is urgently needed. Now, the department's third priority is succeeding through teamwork. And our network of allies and partners magnifies our power and expands our security. And no other country on earth has anything like it. And over the past few months in the Indo-Pacific, our friends have taken major steps forward. The Philippines has agreed to nearly double the number of sites where we cooperate together. Japan committed to double its defense spending. And we're going to forward station the 12th Marine Littoral Regiment, which is one of the most advanced formations in the Corps, in Okinawa, so that we can better deter conflict in the first island chain. We've also made history with the AUKUS partnership. It is a generational initiative with our Australian and British allies to build game-changing defense advantages that will deter aggression and promote a free and open Indo-Pacific and boost our defense industrial capability. And you can also see the profound power of our alliances in today's united NATO. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we further strengthened NATO's defense and deterrence on its eastern flank. And congressional leadership on the European Deterrence Initiative and our investments since 2014 helped us react quickly and boldly to Russia's cruel war of choice and made our deterrence even stronger. In sum, Mr. Chairman, this is the budget that will meet this moment, and I respectfully ask for your support. And the single most effective way that this committee can support the department and our outstanding troops is with an on-time, full-year appropriation. So I look forward to working with everyone so that we can continue to defend our democracy and support the forces of freedom in this hour of challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Austin. I now recognize General Milley for his remarks.
Chair Granger and Chair Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And I have been distinctly privileged to defend this country for 43 consecutive years in uniform. And this will maybe be my last set of posture hearings. I want to thank the Congress up front for your continued support to our military, not only this year, but every year for the last 4 decades. And I am very privileged to represent the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, and families of the United States Joint Force, alongside Secretary Austin and Mike McCord, who I want to thank personally for their leadership. Our Joint Force is the most lethal and capable military in the world. Our troops are the best led, best equipped, and best trained force anywhere because of your support. So thank you for what you have done, and yet again I ask that you support this year's request with an on-time budget approval. Our mission, the mission of the uniformed military, and our purpose is very simple. It is to defend the United States of America, and our task is to fight and win in all domains of combat. In order to do that, our priorities are simple. Maintain high states of readiness while simultaneously modernizing for the future operating environment and taking care of our people and their families while always sustaining our values. Our end state is that America is secure and great power war is prevented. In order to protect the American people, readiness now and readiness in the future through modernization is our #1 priority, and there is no other #1. The Joint Force will deliver modernization of our armed forces and security to the people of the United States at the FY24 budget request of $842 billion. And we will be good stewards of the American people's money, trust, and confidence. Right now, the international system is under stress. For the first time in our nation's history, the United States is facing 2 major nuclear powers whose vital national security interests are in competition with the United States. Both the People's Republic of China and Russia have the means to threaten our interests and our way of life. But war with Russia or China is neither inevitable nor imminent. Great power war has not happened in the last 80 years, in large part because of the rules put in place at the end of World War II and the capabilities of the United States military along with our allies and partners. The United States military was able to do that because we were and still are the most powerful military in the world, and we must remain so if great power peace is to continue to hold. This budget is driven by our strategy and deters war. This budget maintains our capabilities. It maintains our strengths and our high levels of readiness now, and it prepares us for the future. The People's Republic of China remains our #1 long-term geostrategic security challenge, so-called pacing threat in our strategy. The PRC intends to be the regional hegemon in the Western Pacific and Asia within the next 10 years and exceed the United States' overall military capability by 2049, according to their open-source speeches. The People's Republic of China's actions are moving it down the path towards confrontation and potential conflict with its neighbors, and possibly the United States. But again, I say, war with China is neither inevitable nor imminent. Additionally, Russia is an acute threat and remains very dangerous. Over 1 year ago, Russia undertook an illegal and unprovoked war against Ukraine, threatening peace on the European continent and global stability. We are supporting Ukraine in its fight to protect its sovereignty and supporting our NATO allies with the United States force presence in every single nation on NATO's eastern flank. This fight is not just in Ukraine's interest. It is in the U.S. interest to protect the system that has prevented great power war for 8 decades. Additionally, Iran threatens to push the Middle East into regional instability by continuing its support to terrorists and proxy forces. Also, Iran is taking actions to improve its capabilities to produce a nuclear weapon, should it make the decision to do so, while continuing to build its missile forces. From the time of an Iranian decision, as you have heard in previous testimony from members of OSD, Iran could produce fissile material for a nuclear weapon in less than 2 weeks, and would only take several more months to produce an actual nuclear weapon. But the United States remains committed, as a matter of policy, that Iran will not have a fielded nuclear weapon. And we, the United States military, have developed multiple options for our national leadership to consider if or when Iran ever decides to develop an actual nuclear weapon. North Korea's continued ballistic missile testing and nuclear weapons development pose real threats to our homeland, as well as our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. Terrorists continue to operate around the globe, threaten the United States and our allies and partners. But this budget supports both our prevention of war on the Korean Peninsula and our continued worldwide counterterrorism efforts. In concert with other elements of national power, the United States military stands ready to protect our nation's interests and the American people. And right now, today, as we sit here, we are currently standing watch on freedom's frontier with nearly 250,000 troops, 250,000 troops in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and South America. The United States never fights alone. A key source of our strength to keep the peace and prevail in war is our large global network of alliances and partnerships. For example, just this month, we conducted 63 operations and joint and combined exercises globally with our allies and partners. In addition to that, we are currently training over 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers in neighboring countries. On a weekly basis, our Transportation Command is moving a small city's worth of logistics to enable our continued global operations. While 1/3 of our Navy, 100 ships, is on patrol ensuring freedom of maritime navigation, and our Air Force secures our skies. And lastly, our operational readiness rates are higher now than they've been in many, many years. Our minimum standard is about 1/3 of the force at the highest states of readiness. There are 10,330 units in the United States military. 4,680 of them are active duty. 60% of our active duty force is at the highest states of readiness right now and could deploy to combat in less than 30 days. 10% could deploy to combat in less than 96 hours. This military is ready. We are prepared to fight now, and we will continue to be prepared to fight in the future. And this budget supports the programs and exercises at the service, joint, and combined levels to keep our military ready to defend the nation. Furthermore, the joint force is at an important inflection point. We must balance current operations readiness with future modernization. We must not allow ourselves to create the false trap that we can either modernize or focus only on today. We must do both. We must fully integrate developing technologies, including precision long-range fires, hypersonic weapons, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, robotics, and the pervasive all-domain sensors. The time is now. We have very little margin to wait. And the common thread critical to accomplish all of this is our people. We must continue investing in training, education, talent management in order to be prepared for a future operating environment. Additionally, we must ensure that we are taking care of our troops and their families' quality of life. I urge Congress to support this budget's significant pay raises, health care, housing, and child care initiatives. This budget sustains our current readiness and adapts the joint force to the future warfighting requirements. This is a matter of significant national security importance, and we must act with clear-eyed urgency. By doing so, no adversary should ever underestimate the resolve of our nation and the strength of our military. Preparation for war and deterring war is extraordinarily expensive, but it's not as expensive as fighting a war. And this budget prevents war and prepares us to fight it if necessary. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your comments. Secretary Austin, China is building 20 ships a year and has a fleet of now over 400 vessels, and as I understand, capable vessels. Meanwhile, the department's budget request proposes to decommission 11 ships this year while procuring 9. The request will shrink the Navy's fleet to 291 ships by fiscal year 2028, despite having a goal of 373 ships. Mr. Secretary, how does having fewer ships deter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, thanks, Chairman. Let me begin by saying we have the most powerful and dominant Navy in the world. And we will continue to make sure that it remains that way. As we look to invest in capabilities, we're looking for the right mix of capabilities that can support our warfighting concepts, and we'll continue to remain focused on that. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, this budget, we're asking for $48 billion to invest in effective naval forces. So from our perspective, it's about making sure that we have the right capabilities to support our warfighting concepts, and I'm comfortable that we are moving in the right direction.
Well, I understand the need for increased capability. But you know the old saying, you can't catch a ball in left field if you only have a guy in right field. So numbers do matter, and your budget proposes to decommission 8 ships before the end of their service life, and ship count matters, as I said earlier. When are we going to see the department's 30-year shipbuilding plan?
Well, the Navy continues to work on that plan, and it will as soon as they are complete, certainly we'll bring it forward to Congress.
Okay, we look forward to seeing that. Last week, I led a congressional delegation of members to Asia. In Taiwan, nearly every single leader we met with remarked at the extremely slow pace of U.S. defense articles. Unfortunately, this is not a familiar theme, which was highlighted last month in our Ukraine hearing. Secretary Austin, what are Ukraine and Taiwan's most critical defense needs, and what steps are you taking to expedite and prioritize the delivery of these items?
Well, 2 things. First, in terms of FMS, we all recognize that there's been, we faced some headwinds as a result of 2 years of COVID and pressure on supply chains and the inability of industry to really move at the pace that they wanted to move at. And I think the industry will catch up in terms of that backlog. But I put together a Tiger team months ago to really dig down into the FMS issues and identify log jams and work through those log jams to try to do everything we can to help expedite the delivery of key platforms. And I've also put together a group of senior leaders in the department to focus on this on a weekly, monthly basis to make sure that we are providing the right kinds of capability that Taiwan needs. So this remains an area of focus for the department.
Thank you. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the discussion about the number of ships is interesting, but as General Milley said, we don't go to war alone. So if we include Australia, Canada, NATO, you know, all the great powers that we work with, we would have a multiplying effect that neither China or Russia has. Would that be a fair statement, Secretary Austin or General Milley?
That is in fact correct, Ranking Member McCollum. We will always fight with our allies and partners, and again, the capability that they bring to the table magnifies our overall capability. So you could expect that in any instance we would be able to draw upon some of their capability as well. So we work on a routine basis to make sure that we're interoperable and make sure that.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like you to go into more importance on the recent, on February 2nd, the agreement that you signed with the Philippines, whichever one of you gentlemen want to answer that. President Marcos seems to have made some deliberate decisions to align more closely with the United States interest and away from China. Could you kind of tell the committee more about this agreement with the Philippines and how you see it enhancing our efforts in the region? Because I think this goes back to the whole question of the multiplying effect of having resources that China and Russia do not have. And if there's any other nations in Indo-Pac that you see wanting to align more closely with the United States, with China, as these new relationships that you've been working so hard, along with state, to foster.
Well, I was, as a matter of fact, out in the Philippines and engaged the president on this particular issue, and I was really pleased that the president made the decision to move forward and increase the number of sites where we could work along with the Philippine forces to increase interoperability and develop their skills as well. And it's actually a benefit to them, as you know. So this really is a significant significant movement forward. I think we'll continue to build upon this as our airmen and soldiers and sailors rotate in and out and work with the Philippine military. So if you take a look around the region, I mentioned AUKUS earlier. This is a generational capability. As we develop a conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarine capability for Australia, it will help us make sure that we can do the right things to continue to deter any adversary that would want to threaten or challenge the free and open Indo-Pacific. So if you look at Japan, as I mentioned earlier, Japan has doubled its defense spending. It's allowed us to position a new element in Japan and in Okinawa. If you look at a number of the countries that we have partnerships with or alliances with, we continue to work to build and strengthen those alliances and partnerships. And so we've moved the ball in a significant distance down the field here in the last couple of years. And I really feel good about what we're doing to increase access and to strengthen partnerships.
Thank you, gentlemen.
If I could just make a quick comment on that.
Mr. Chair, if that's allowed.
General?
Thank you for the courtesy.
Just 2 points. One is you're correct on the allies and partners, Australia, Japan, but there's many other countries there as well, to include European countries. We've done exercises with the Brits and the French, also in the Asia-Pacific region, so they are force multipliers. Secondly is our subforce, which is rarely talked about. I'm not going to talk about it in detail right now, but our subforce is submarine force, incredibly capable and very deadly and extremely lethal. So those two pieces, I think, would make a huge difference, and help deter any kind of aggression by China. The last thing is the Philippines, but the Philippines and other countries in that region, they sit astride the key sea lines of communication that China relies on for their international access to the Middle East oil, et cetera, et cetera. Those allies and partners of ours are fundamental, and us being able to conduct military operations or having access, basing, and overflight to those countries in time of conflict or crisis would be fundamental, and it would give us a decisive advantage.
Thank you, and hopefully we can speed up the acquisition of those Virginia-class submarines. Ms. Granger.
Secretary Austin, our enemies are developing stronger ties with nations throughout the South America. While we need to focus on the growing threats in Europe and the Pacific, we can't ignore the threats to the south of us. So what particular things are in what you're presenting, and what is our support for our partners in Southcom?
In strengthening our relationships and in maintaining access in the Southcom area is a key area of focus for us and our Southcom commander. Our Southcom commander, as you know, General Richardson, is absolutely focused on this and active. She's increasing the number of engagements and, where possible, exercising with partners. And so I see this continuing to move in a positive direction. We have some security force assistance elements that are working with various countries to strengthen their indigenous capability to be able to protect their sovereign territory. So this is something that we remain focused on, and I applaud what General Richardson is doing in terms of continuing to develop additional access and to strengthen the relationships that already exist.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Laro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome our guest this morning, and I thank you, Mr. Secretary, Undersecretary, and Mr. McCord. Thank you very, very much for being here this morning. I apologize for being late, but I think there's 6 hearings I'm going to get to between now and the end of the day. So let me just, there has been the discussion of the budget by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that what we ought to do with regard to the 2024 budget is to apply the 2022 numbers. And within that, there are a number of folks who believe that that may be true for non-defense efforts, but that and that we should hold, if you will, defense harmless in that effort. And I want to just briefly quote Undersecretary McCord in a letter that you sent to the Appropriations Committee this week. You stated, should, as some have suggested, the Defense Department be exempt from such reductions and the entire burden fall on non-defense discretionary agencies, the cuts would be just as harmful, even if distributed differently. Our whole of government response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine clearly demonstrates the value of integrating security assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, sanctions, and export controls. No one agency could achieve the effects we are producing as a team, and deep cuts to any one of the agencies would undermine the effort as a whole. For any of the witnesses, could you please outline how the non-defense funding affects the Department of Defense and our national security? For any of the witnesses. Mr. McCord? Since I quoted you.
Thank you. Yes, Ukraine's probably the most vivid example, as said in the letter, of the teamwork that we require with export control, sanctions, every kind of tool, and this goes across. Right, we need an educated workforce, which starts, with the school system. So we have all kinds of needs. Every time the Department of Homeland Security fails to get to the place they need to be to, we get called on to help. So there's so many connections of what we need to do. And as I think you are aware, I'm certainly aware that Chair Granger and Chairman Calvert have are not advocating deep cuts to defense.
understand that
But
as
then there's
well.
the math problem.
Why I said some.
Right, there's the math problem that we all understand, right? If you have half the discretionary budget is exempt, and that's what we're trying to recognize in our response.
Thank you, and I'm going to look forward to your help in this effort. Yes, General.
And as Mike has indicated, it is always a whole of government effort with these complex problem sets that we're dealing with. And the old saying that if you cut State Department's budget too much, then you need to buy more
More
bullets.
ammunition.
Right, because what we want to do is we want to drive things towards greater stability and security around the globe. And of course, the solution to every problem is not necessarily a military solution, but we need to work together to provide access to other agencies so that they can reach the places they need to reach and do the things they need to do. But it is typically a whole of government effort, and I think we just need to remain mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If I might, I have, if you will, two parochial questions. I appreciate that, and I welcome your help as we move forward in terms of crafting the budget for 2024. And as I said, two parochial questions. As we move to the future of Army aviation, develop the future long-range assault aircraft, the reconnaissance aircraft, and this is, I'll be very, very brief. The question is related to the Black Hawk. Even the eventual fielding of a new Flora rotary wing aircraft, I am told the Army will be still flying hundreds of UH-60M Black Hawks for the next 40 years. Many are flying now. What are the DoD's plans to preserve the industrial base, suppliers, and workforce that built the Black Hawk and vital to the Army aviation of the future? And I'll just add very, very quickly, this has to do with the F-35. I'd like to give you an opportunity, Mr. Secretary, that there have been really conflicting statements regarding Secretary Kendall's support for the upgrade. If you can just tell us what is the Department of Defense position on whether to upgrade the existing F-135 or develop a new engine for the F-35? Gotcha. Okay.
That's-
That's fine. That's
Might
fine. I
want to turn
appreciate
your
that.
mics on, too.
And with regard to the Black Hawk?
Well, there's no question that your home state provides a tremendous capability to
Very proud of it.
our overall defense effort. You mentioned the long-range aviation piece. That, as you know, that's still a work in progress. That's in dispute, and because it's at that stage, I'm not able to make any comments. But again, I think that'll resolve itself going forward. And when it does, we'll make sure we come and brief you in a delegation.
I've just meant, I understand what the that there is a dispute and there will be a resolve of that, but there's also the issue of the continued use of Black Hawk helicopters. And will you continue to be using the Black Hawk since it is, many are flying right now, and what will be, the future of the Black
It's a workhorse, as you know, and so it'll be around for some time to come. And in the meantime, the Army and the other services continue to look for greater capability in the future, or additional capability in the future, and that work in terms of modernization will continue. But the Black Hawk has served us well. I've personally benefited from that tremendous aircraft, and I have every expectation that it will continue to do so going forward.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me join many others and just thank all three of you for your service and your professionalism. I've had the opportunity to interact with you probably in ways you don't even remember in some cases a lot over the course of your careers, and just have always been impressed, again, with the professionalism and the absolute dedication all three of you have shown to the country. So it's much appreciated, and we wish you well and General Milley in whatever your next endeavor is, but you certainly rendered exceptional service to our country, so thank you for that. I'm going to thank one other entity while I'm chatting here, and that's the United States Congress, because as General Milley went through the higher state of operational readiness we have and some of the things that have been accomplished, it struck me that Congress has actually given the Department of Defense, and there's some differences even on this panel about that, more money than President Trump asked for and more money than President Biden has asked for. So Congress is, in a sense, responsible for those higher rates of readiness because we've used our judgment to say whatever the president's asked for may all be good. We think we need a little bit more, and I think that comes out of some of the things that happened with sequester and the Budget Control Act during President Obama's era. But anyway, those things have led us to a better position, and my hope is we'll do that again, quite frankly. I think your budget, there's a lot of good things in here. I think it needs to be more. 3.2% in an era of 6% inflation is effectively a cut in inflation-adjusted dollars. There's two areas I want to both ask you about and flag for you that, and for the committee that I'll be working on. And it's somewhat parochial, but I think it's in the national interest. The first is disappointed to see, particularly given the importance of artillery as we've seen in the situation in Ukraine, to see for the third year in a row, the Army has cut the PIM, the Paladin Integrated Management Program. We managed to restore those cuts last year. I think probably, we're still furnishing that system to the active and the National Guard, and we're now sending lots of it to our allies and to the Ukrainians as well. So I would just tell you there's not enough in the Army's budget to maintain the production lines that exist there. So I would ask you to, why the cut? And the answer may be that you just have too many other things to do. I get it. Your business is tough choices. But I would argue that's a bad choice right now, particularly given the situation in Ukraine. The second is one that is something that we all want to accomplish together. I just worry about the rate of it. And that's the transition from the E3 to E7 command and control platform. I have Tinker Air Force Base in my district. I have Fort Sill Army Post in my district. And I'm all for transitioning from the E3 to the E7. It's a good decision. Should have honestly been done some time ago. But the rate of retirement for those E3s is well ahead of the rate of acquisition. And that's partly just a production problem. I mean, it takes a while to get a new aircraft up and running. And I worry about that interim time because I think we are in a very dangerous world here where you're going to lose capacity. I'm not for keeping the E3s. I just want to bring on E7s as we retire E3s so that we never put you in the situation where you have to deny a combatant commander some capability that he or she thinks they need. And those are two I would just flag for you, and then ask for any response about either of those items I mentioned.
Well, first of all, let me thank you and the entire Congress for your incredible support over the years, and I absolutely agree with you that we could not be who we are and do what we do without the tremendous support, tremendous congressional support that we are provided routinely. So thanks so much for that. On the Paladin, we continue to see the importance of artillery, in war fighting. Of course, you've seen us really hustle to make sure that Ukrainians have not only the weapon systems but the munitions that they need to remain effective in this fight. The Army feels that the rate that they're being produced right now, it meets their needs, and it also allows them to invest in future capabilities as well. And so as the needs change, then the Army, of course, will continue
Just to make the point, Mr. Secretary, not to interrupt you, it meets your needs because Congress put more of them in there than you asked for last time. And we're reverting back to the same number. And I would just suggest, look, you got a lot of stuff across a lot of areas to deal with, and I respect that. You have to make a lot of really hard decisions. This one, I think, is one that you run the risk of shutting down the line to some degree. So, I mean, we intervened the last 2 times and got it, and again, you got what you need. Maybe we can do that again, but I don't think they're being produced at the rate we need in your budget. They are being produced at the rate we need right now. So I interrupted you, and I apologize, went over time, yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Ruppersberger, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
that
It
straight
takes
one of these
a long time to get it right, but you did it well. Thank you. First thing, I want to acknowledge the leadership of both of you. Throughout my years, I've worked with you in Iraq, Afghanistan, and you're some of the better leaders that I've worked with, and you're doing a great job, and I want to acknowledge that. I'm going to ask 2 questions, one of each. First thing, I'm deeply concerned about, and this is to General Milley, I'm deeply concerned about efforts to reduce our defense top line to previous year's level, especially as China increases its own military spending each year. If we don't prioritize investing in our national security today, I fear we risk a much costlier fight with China down the road, whenever that may be, whether it's 20, 25, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. General Milley, can you please describe the strategic advantages we would be handing over to the Chinese Communist Party if the 2024 defense budget top line were to return to what it was in fiscal year 2022, or if we were to pass the budget a year late?
Well, in both cases, we would have to cut a significant amount of programs. Congressman Cole just mentioned artillery, for example. We know that artillery inflicts 70% of all casualties in warfare. We know that other things, shipbuilding, for example, F-35, all these programs would have to get cut back, and that's unfortunate. The other thing that would be cut is readiness. We know that if budgets aren't passed on time, you can't do multi-year contracts. You can't lock in for industry the amount of ammunition, the amount of platforms you need, et cetera. And then for training and readiness, we've gone through this drill several times. We've got all kinds of analysis that shows that our training would be reduced significantly. Our exercises, last year, for example, we did, like I said, 63 just last month, 63 exercises around the world. We did 23 CTCs. We've got guys going through all kinds of aviation training. We're dropping a lot of bombs. Our pilots are flying a lot of hours. All those things would come down. All your readiness levels, everything that's been achieved over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, all of that would start going in the opposite direction with continuing resolutions, or if you went back to previous budgets. I think it would be very significant, and the risk would increase with China. It would be the wrong signal to send.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who agree with you. There are others that don't. And it's important that we get the facts out. And as I said before, you two have a lot of experience in this role, and we're going to have to rely on you a lot. Secretary Austin, and building off of what I just talked to the General about, my second question for you is about the impact of potentially reducing the Department's civilian workforce to offset top-line cuts. As you know, the Department faces a lot of challenges in hiring and retaining its civilian cybersecurity workforce due to attrition and loss of talent to the private sector. And I do represent NSA, and I have for 20 years. How will cuts to the Department's civilian cybersecurity workforce further exacerbate this problem and make us more vulnerable to cyber attacks by foreign actors?
Well, it'll have a significant impact. As you know, cyber threats in this day and age are enormous, and they come from every corner of the globe. And so the force that we've developed, I think we've done a really good job of putting together a significant capability that allows us to protect our interests and support our overall national defense strategy. We need the right people. We need the talented people, to your point, sir, to be able to continue to do the work that we're doing. Now, we've really pressed hard to make sure that we're going after the right people. We're providing initiatives We're mindful of the fact that this is a very, very competitive field, and so we have to do what we need to do to make sure we get the right people and we can retain the right people. But to your point, if we cut those kinds of people, then I think it'll have a significant impact on our warfighting capability.
Thank you for your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ruppersberger. Got to write that down. Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, General Milley, great to have both of you here again. I echo the comments of my colleagues in appreciation of your service. General Milley, personally to you, thank you for all that you've done for this country. I'll miss working with you, though I'm sure you're not going to miss sitting in these hearings in front of these panels when you leave your position. Secretary Austin, this is a question pretty much for you, but I'm a big believer, as my colleagues know, in the state partnership program. I think they've added a lot of value around the globe where we have those. No better example than what the Californians did with Ukrainians over time, and I just believe it brings a lot of value to not only the partner nations, but for our own forces, for the National Guard troops that get an opportunity to do some training with these partners. This is related to Taiwan, and as Chairman Calvert said, a delegation of us just recently visited there. I wonder how best we can help our Taiwanese friends prepare for contingencies, and is a state partnership or a modified program like the state partnership program for Taiwan, is it advisable, practical, possible? What would be your comments? Why or why not?
I think it is, and since you were just there, you know that we have a number of National Guard elements that have been working with our partners in Taiwan and increasing their proficiency in a number of areas. To your point, this program adds value wherever we are, wherever we're partnered with around the globe. And I think the point that the example that you use is a great one. You know, Ukrainians benefited greatly from all the work that the Guardsmen did, over the years. But yes, I believe that our continued work with the Guardsmen in Taiwan, I think will be very, very valuable. So we'll continue to work to structure this so that we optimize, the effort of the Guard, and it complements all the other things that we're doing with the Taiwans.
Mr. Secretary, the compacts of free association with the Marshall Islands and Micronesia are up for renewal in the coming months, with Palau's expiring next year. I understand the defense provisions of the existing compacts remain valid regardless of renewal. That being said, the incentives of the freely associated states to continue the security relationships expire with the economic assistance. Because of their strategic location to our military assets present in the countries, these partner states seem to provide key terrain that can help advance our strategic goals as we concentrate on the Indo-Pacific region, while at the same time helping us directly combat Chinese influence. Can you articulate the importance of these compacts to the department?
Extremely important, and I agree with the points that you've made. They do provide, they magnify our efforts in terms of access, presence, so I think we will continue to do everything we can to make sure that we're strengthening our relationships, and that we're whatever additional access we can gain, and we're going to continue to do that. So.
The department's budget this year includes requested multi-year procurement authorities, and we've already talked in your opening statement about that. This is a question basically for Mr. McCord. These multi-year procurement authorities are not typical for munitions, but have been used when procuring large systems such as aircraft and ships. Mr. McCord, can you expound on why the DoD went this route with munitions and how you selected the munitions that I should have mentioned in the beginning of the question, the SM-6, AMRAAM, LRASM, this sort of thing. So can you expand on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Womack. Yes, the thought had been for many years that you buy missiles in enough quantities that a multi-year wasn't necessary. But what we found clearly with Ukraine was that the industrial base there on more ground-focused munitions was not agile enough due to a number of factors the Secretary has already mentioned: supply chain issues, common components, workforce issues in the COVID era that have decreased that agility. So the effort that we undertook in the department, really under Deputy Secretary Hicks' leadership, was to do the thinking about where would we like to be in a few years for the more larger scale Pacific contingencies, and start taking those steps now. Things that ideally maybe, if you had known 4 years ago where you'd be in Ukraine, you could have done some of those on the ground side. And that's what led to what we're doing here, is to expand, as you said, for the first time into the munitions world. And also we have a concept we've been working on in my team for some years of having multi-years that overlapped and reinforced, because so many of these missiles are produced by one or two companies. And so we brought that concept in as well. We do believe that this is going to, as the Secretary said, provide more of a stability signal that companies rely on, because this is a space in the budget where there's been a little more fluctuation than there has been on something like submarines, where we also have multi-years. And so we're trying to bring stability as one of the tools we need. It's not the only thing that needs to happen in terms of the health of the industrial base, but we think it's going to be a big thing that we can do to position ourselves better in particular for the larger scale contingencies.
Sorry for going over, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for your service. General Milley, I'm glad you still have your Texas license as you look at the next phase. But I want to thank all of you. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you one question, but let me just lay out the facts. Do you believe that great power competition in the Western Hemisphere is a defense issue? Now, we know the importance of the State Department, USID, and Department of Commerce, and everybody else. I understand all that. It's a comprehensive approach. But I listened to the answer that you gave Ms. Granger, and you talked about what Southcom is doing and all the work they're doing that. But I noticed you left Northcom, which has Mexico, because right now you have Southcom covers everything south of Mexico. And if you look at what China is doing, 36% of their total food imports comes from Latin America and the Caribbean. When you look at lithium reserves and all that, it's in that area of responsibility. You look at infrastructure projects. I don't want to go through all of them, but infrastructure projects, 5G development, safe city projects. Space infrastructure, which is very important, what they were doing down there, and so on and so on. And that's China and Russia. But then if you look at Mexico, which is right next door, I'm concerned that Northcom is not paying that much attention to them. And I'm sure they're going to say they disagree with me. I understand all that. But we did ask follow-up information, and I think we're still waiting for that follow-up information after we had the Northcom commander. But just to give you, we just got back from a bipartisan meeting in Mexico. Fentanyl, and you know the problem, how many people it kills in the United States. That fentanyl precursors will go into Manzanillo, Lázaro Cárdenas, and then about 75% of all the fentanyl and fake pills move through the Tijuana, San Diego area, if you look at the geography itself. When you look at the critical locations of the PRC investments, a lot of them are close to our northern border, lithium and other areas. When you look at the investments they've done in Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas, which is where they get their shipments from China, you look at the new Isthmus Corridor that Mexico is doing, which is their new Panama Canal on land. Who is doing the investment in those two areas into the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific? A lot of it's the Chinese. And there's some other space infrastructure things I cannot talk here at this location. but it's very concerning what we're seeing. So my question is there a way, and I think we did ask for y'all to study whether Mexico should be part of Southcom, and I understand, you know, Mexico, Canada, part of Northcom, I understand all that, but either that or we get them to work a little closer together, because I don't see an alignment that we do all this great work and we need more resources in Southcom, but we're leaving out Mexico. And I live in Laredo. I live just a few miles away from the border, just literally a few miles. So I'm concerned about that. So my question, after I laid all that, do you think that great power competition is important part of the defense in the Western Hemisphere?
I certainly do, sir, and I would also say that all of our combatant commanders feel the same way. And I'm sure that if General Van Herk were sitting here today, he would say that this is an area that's important to him. I would also say that our combatant commanders routinely coordinate with each other, pass information, and work with each other to ensure that there are no significant gaps and seams between the combatant commanders' areas of responsibility. I do know that General Van Herk continues to engage the leadership in Mexico. I mean, that's routinely, and I would say that this is important, but we can never do enough. I'll make sure, by the way, that you get the answers to your questions, and this is something that we need to continue to focus on. And you mentioned the fentanyl problem. It's primarily a law enforcement issue, but you know, DOD will continue to do what it can to support the overall whole of government effort in this regard.
Yes, sir. And we'll work with you in any way that we do. My time's up, but there was another young Hispanic soldier that died in Fort Hood, besides Vanessa Guillen. I know there's an investigation. I'm talking to the Secretary of the Army tomorrow, but just want to bring that up to y'all also.
Not lost on us, sir, and I'm very, you know, my heart goes out to her family and to her teammates. And again, this will remain an area of focus for us.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all of you. It's been great working with you. General Milley, you're welcome in Texas when you get ready to retire, if that be your choice. I just finished a travel into PACOM, where there was the importance of power projection for the region, which seems to be very, very important. We need to modernize weapon systems, but we also need a place to forward operate from. What are we doing to get more infrastructure for power projection into PACOM, and are we doing enough?
Thank you, sir. The answer to the second question first, I'll probably never say we've done enough. We will continue to work at this. I think you may have heard me say earlier that we're investing $9.1 billion in this year in the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. That allows us to invest in infrastructure that gives us greater access and also improve some of the defensive, our defensive postures in places like Guam, and also do things to protect Hawaii as well. We have done a lot of work to engage our partners and our allies in the Philippines. We're working with Australia to increase our access there, and we've developed a great partnership. Our rotational units are going in and out of Australia at a greater frequency. So we continue to work this. But to answer your question, we're doing a lot. It will probably never be enough.
Well, we continue to see an increased budget for infrastructure and acquisition and development in that area, in your opinion, as we go down the road? Because I just came from Kwajalein, and yes, we're building a barracks there, but they've got some buildings there that really need work.
You will continue to see a significant investment in those types of things going forward. I think it's important that that we have the ability to be able to forward position our troops so that they can be relevant in any kind of a upcoming contest.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I have to ask you about Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility in my district in Honolulu. First of all, I just want to commend the job that Vice Admiral Wade and the Pearl Harbor Joint Task Force are doing to address this crisis in a transparent and deliberate manner. So they're doing a good job, but they need a lot of help, obviously, from back in the Pentagon, and so I would commend that to you. But I have to ask you just for a clarification, a confirmation, I hope. Does the Department of Defense remain fully committed to the expeditious and safe defueling and closure of the Red Hill facility?
The Department of Defense remains fully committed, and I personally remain fully committed. As a matter of fact, I just met with the team out in Hawaii on this very topic here, and we routinely get updates. And I would agree with you that the Admiral is doing a tremendous job. And most important, he's doing a lot of good things to keep the community informed and you know, the delegation informed of what we're doing and what his needs are, what our requirements are.
Thank you so much for that. Are you aware of any budgetary limitations on the Defense Department achieving the safe and expeditious defueling and closure of Red Hill? I've looked high and low for it. I don't believe so. I believe that you have the adequate funding to achieve that goal, but I don't want this budget to go past us if there are any limitations whatsoever in that mission, as well as the broader mission, which is you know, remediation, some health risks as well.
Well, again, thanks for your continued support in this area as well. I am currently not aware of any obstacles that would prevent us from achieving our objective. This is going to take some time, and things can change. And if they do change, and we do need have requirements, I'll certainly come back and ask for more help, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me shift gears on you, because I was also on the congressional delegation that the chair led to the Indo-Pacific. We were not only in Taiwan, but in Japan, Okinawa, and the Republic of Korea. And first of all, it was amazing to spend time with our service members there, top to bottom, high quality, committed to the job. So I just wanted to pass that along to you. One of my huge takeaways was along the lines of Mr. Womack's questions, which have to do with the sufficiency of our munitions and other armaments that are provided to our friends and allies around the world. And it just strikes me that with the burn rate in Ukraine, which is not going to go away anytime soon, and with the needs of our friends and allies relying on us to provide them, because they don't have that capability for the most part themselves, and with our own intentions to, as part of our Indo-Pacific strategy, to pre-position equipment and other facilities, including munitions, out in the Indo-Pacific, that our defense industrial base just really needs to be ramped up. Now, I don't think this is a matter only of you know, multi-fiscal year programming and procurement. It's a matter of the basic funding to do that. Because you can set it up for multi-year procurement, but if the money's not there to do it to start with, or if the defense industrial base is not capable of that production, then we've got a problem. You referenced in your opening remarks $10 billion invested in our industrial base, and so what I'd like to explore with you is, how do we not get ourselves behind the 8 ball in terms of the basic needs that we have in both Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific, and conflicts that we may not know about today?
Well, thanks. We're doing a lot. And let me say up front that our industrial base is really a core element that's enable our strategic advantage, and we will continue to work with industry to make sure that we're doing everything possible to signal to them the right things in terms of our requirements, and to help wherever possible to expand capacity and capability. So you know, we have a $170 billion request for procurement. We've asked you for multi-year contracting authority, and I think those send powerful signals. But not only are we buying the numbers of munitions that industry can produce, we're also investing in additional capacity so that so they can begin to expand and rapidly get us up to where we need to be and help us replenish the stocks of some of our allies and partners who have donated to the Ukraine effort. We've asked for additional authority in terms of the Defense Production Act authorities, and the president has supported us on that. And so my team is working day and night, working with industry to make sure that we are getting as much productivity out of the key places in industry as possible. And I've engaged CEOs, my deputies engage CEOs, but to your point, we need to do more. We are doing more, and we will do more in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for the testimony and your service. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for mentioning the spousal working conditions improving. I'm very proud that my spouse Licensing Relief Act was signed into law by the President in January under the VA bill. As I visited multiple commands from COCOM down to platoon commander, I'm not sure that the troops yet fully understand that this spouse licensing reciprocity is available to them, and it is the current law of the land. So I recommend we get a DoD-wide way to message that spouses can cross-deck their professional licenses, doctors, lawyers, real estate agents, across state lines when they're active duty and on orders. I don't think it's being fully absorbed and utilized yet. On the pay raise, I personally do not believe that 5.2% pay raise is enough, especially for our junior enlisted troops. To put things in context, the average E1, E2 are making roughly $22,000 a year, and in fact, it's not until you're an E4 over 5 years that you're making the equivalent of what would be a $15 per hour wage if it was normalized for a 40-hour work week, which means that effectively the bottom third of our ranks are making less than fast food workers are in many of our states, and some of our states are very high cost of living. Given the recruitment and retention challenges that we have, I think we have a collective action here between this committee, Armed Services Committee, as well as in the Senate and DOD to look at how we can maybe not take a one-size-fits-all pay adjustment of 5.2% and get our junior enlisted specifically above that $32,000 a year number, which is the equivalent of $15 per hour. I think there's ways to do that without impacting the top line budgets, whether it's harvesting from the flag officer ranks that 1% goes a lot further for a flag officer than our junior enlisted. And so I look forward to those conversations, but I think that's a critical element to the quality of life, especially from a recruitment perspective. The gap between DOD and civilian counterparts is at an historic high when it comes to salaries right now, especially for the junior enlisted. Mr. Secretary, are you aware of the strike fighter shortfall that we have DOD-wide, but specifically within the Navy, the challenges that we have from a number of aircraft per air wing and per aircraft carrier?
What I do know is that CNO and the Chief of the Air Force continue to invest in fighter capability, and again, it's going to take a couple of or several years before we get up to what they believe is
that's right,
meets their full capacity.
Yeah, I understand there's some projections where we're literally 2 air wings short relative to the number of aircraft carriers within the Navy side. And I'm sure you're aware, this committee, as well as our counterparts in the Senate, in FY22 added 12 Super Hornets to the budget, and then in FY23 added 8 Super Hornets to the budget. I wasn't sure if you're aware, but those jets have yet to be actually awarded to the prime contractor, and they are actively shutting down not just their production line, but their entire supply chain. I'm a big proponent of F-35. A large portion of that aircraft is made in my district. I believe we need capacity as well as the capability, and I think right now we are losing as a nation one of the critical tools to closing that strike fighter gap in the form of the Super Hornet production line. The lawyers are battling it out right now. This is one of those things that, watching it from my perspective, I'm calling balls and strikes. I think the government is overreaching. They're asking for intellectual property from the contractor that is different from tech data packages designed for basic sustainment and repair. I think we are overreaching, and this is one of the things that I think is going to impact the customer being the warfighter and the taxpayer in the form of 20 jets not being put on contract. And so I would encourage you to look into that. The Navy is actively working this with the prime contractor right now. But I think we need some supervision here and just get the lawyers in the room to put a kibosh on this, get a negotiated settlement, and figure out some other means to get that intellectual property. And so I'll end with the question, General Milley. You worked in both administrations. You were very familiar with the conditional withdrawal elements of the Afghanistan situation under both administrations. Do you agree with the assertion that was made earlier in this room that the debacle, the State Department-led debacle out of Afghanistan and the travesty of Abbey Gate, the devastation, the loss of 13 personnel, was the fault of the previous administration?
I'm not going to characterize fault or point fingers. I think, as we all know, that the end state was a strategic withdrawal, and when the enemy occupies the capital of the nation that you supported, that's a strategic failure. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. All of us are learning those lessons. Both Secretary Austin and I have served many years in Afghanistan. I'm deeply personally invested in it and psychologically invested in it. And I can think of no greater tragedy than what happened at Abbey Gate. And I have yet to fully reconcile myself to that entire affair. So I don't want to point fingers or anything. What happened in Afghanistan did not happen in the last 19 days or even the last 19 months. That was a 20-year war. There were decisions made all along the way, which culminated in what the outcome was. And there's many, many lessons to be learned. And I think we're just at the beginning of that lessons learned process, not at the end.
Well said. Thank you for your service.
If I could, I'd like to thank you, though, personally, on behalf of my wife, really. She's pushed that licensure amendment significantly for years, she and many others. And you and the President and members of Congress brought that home. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, General. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Kelmer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you both for being with us today. I'm hoping to get to two topics. First, as you both know, changes to the military health system have resulted in downsizing at several military treatment facilities, including Naval Hospital Bremerton in my neck of the woods, which recently closed its emergency and its labor and delivery departments. Prior to that downsizing, our area already had challenges accessing care. It had been identified by the Department of Health and Human Services as a high-risk area and a health shortage area. We raised concerns about this prior to the downsizing because of that, and unfortunately, the closures have had a real impact on our region and on service members. I really think that the network analysis that was done was really off. The hiring goals were really off. And this isn't sort of a theoretical conversation. We did a roundtable with submariners in our area who have been unable to receive routine screenings or medical care. That impacts fleet readiness. I met with a pregnant sailor who, due to downsizing at the Naval Hospital, was forced to go to a local hospital, waited 8 hours in the emergency room, in the waiting room, and ultimately miscarried in their waiting room. And these aren't isolated incidents. I bring this to your attention because after several letters and questioning and hearings and meetings with the head of DHA, where we've emphasized the inability of the network to handle the burdens of the closures at the Naval Hospital, the concerns of my community just aren't being heard. And so I want to raise this again and ask you if DOD can direct DHA to review some of that downsizing in underserved areas like Kitsap County. I want to ask you what tools are in place to reassign military and civilian providers to areas where there has been a significant degradation in care that is impacting folks in uniform. And I want to know if there's any plan to reassign providers to areas like Kitsap County where we have seen a significant and frankly dangerous decline in healthcare quality for service members.
Well, thank you, sir. I'd just like to start by saying the health and welfare of the force is extremely important to me, and I really appreciate all your support and the support of Congress over the years. We continue to follow congressional intent to, as you know, we were mandated to consolidate military health care under DHA, and of course, there are decisions that have to be made there. And since that decision was made, you know, we faced a global pandemic that put pressure on the workforce across America, the medical workforce across America, and so it made it a bit more difficult to do some things. And so we're facing some of the same challenges that the medical community across the country are facing. But what we're doing about it is we're trying to utilize a variety of tools, including direct hiring authorities. We're exploring bonuses and incentives to hire, to get the right talent in to fill the vacancies that you mentioned. And I will ask our new DHA leader to come in and sit down with you and brief you specifically on Bremerton and what our challenges are and what we're doing about it. So,
Secretary, if I could make a quick comment.
Please go ahead.
On that. In my travels around the military, the number one topic that I get in terms of quality of life, et cetera, is the healthcare system. I was Chief of Staff of the Army, 3.5 years ago. In my first year, this was an issue, and we were asked as chiefs at that time to write an assessment of what we thought of the congressionally mandated consolidation into the DHA. Every one of the chiefs at that time, as I recall, we wrote that this is going to result in significant risk. What we're seeing today, 7 years later, 8 years later, is the fraying. It's not broken, but we're seeing the fraying of the defense healthcare system, which is one of the biggest healthcare systems in America. And that's really cause for concern. And it's the number one issue that's on a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines' minds and their families. It's a big deal.
I think acknowledging that, we are seeing that.
Yep.
We're seeing that in our area. And I plea with you to take a look at what's happening in our region, to look at the impact on readiness, on sailors and on their families, because I don't, sitting across from a sailor who miscarried after waiting for 8 hours to get care, this is just not acceptable, and we've got to do better for these folks who are stepping up for our country. So, thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Great. I agree with the gentleman. We need to do a deep dive on that, see what we can do to improve this immediately. Next, Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before my question, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned Southcom a little while ago, and one of the things that is crucial to them is the security cooperation agreement, something that I've been very supportive of. There's $200 million there, and I just want to make sure that it's on your radar, because it's $200 million for Southcom and AFRICOM, and I just want to make sure that in a region that is, not many good things are happening in this region right now, in this hemisphere, that Southcom has the resources it needs. And as you well know, Southcom not only does, kind of like the regular mission, but they also literally are saving American lives through their interdiction program. So I just wanted to flag that for you, and if you could take a look at it to make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks and that Southcom is not kind of ignored there. I would appreciate that. Chairman Milley, as you know, there's been a lot of conversation about this potential legislation to auction off the lower 3 gigahertz spectrum band, which obviously the DoD uses for, important missions. And Secretary Austin and the Commerce Secretary sent a letter endorsing this agreement, while the Director of Joint Staff signed a formal non-concur memo. So, Mr. Chairman, what, in your view, what is your view about potentially vacating this spectrum, and what risks potentially could it pose to national security, if any?
Hey, sir, I just want to make sure that where we are with this is understood. I convey where we are in terms of what we've done. First of all, I support sharing the spectrum, pieces of the spectrum where appropriate. I do not support putting our national security at risk. And to your point, there are platforms and capabilities that we use and we need that employ pieces of that spectrum. And so what we're doing now is that we're conducting a study to make sure that we account for everything. And once that study is done, then we'll make a recommendation to the president. But just to be clear, I have not agreed to auction off that piece of the spectrum that we need to effectively protect the homeland or conduct our operations altogether.
And I don't know if, Mr. Chairman, you want to
Yeah,
address
so-
the potential risk, if there is any?
Yeah, there is risk. First of all, I'm waiting of the memorandums that you mentioned. I concur that we need to wait until there's a study complete, which is due in September. And therefore, you make a fully informed decision. Making a decision right this second is probably not a good idea. And I concur that it needs to be shared. Sure, no problem in sharing. The issue is how to do that. And we need to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize national security. And what we can't do is vacate the spectrum. Sharing it, fair enough, if we can figure out a way to do that correctly without placing national security at risk. If we were to vacate it, if we were to give up that piece of the spectrum, it would have a significant, huge impact on our ability to protect North America, our ability to protect the Pacific or Europe or anywhere else. That is the part of the spectrum that we use for radars and communications and our ships and navigation and so on and so forth. So it wouldn't be good if we didn't have access to that part of the spectrum. So there's a study ongoing. That study's due in September. I would caution everybody, just wait until the study's done and then move out. Second point is, when that study's complete, I or whomever is the chairman at the time are required to render, or our recommendation was to the secretary, and he agrees with it, is that the secretary and I make an independent recommendation in writing to the president so he can make an informed decision. And I think that's the proper way to head.
Good. No, I appreciate that. And I don't have a lot of time, so I don't know if I'm going to get an answer on this. But you know, obviously, I think it's important to defeat Putin in the Ukraine. But as the chairman said, you know, the days of blank checks are over. And so I think one of the things that would be helpful is if we knew what the strategic end state is in Ukraine. And if you know, not a lot of time, but it would be helpful.
The president was very clear, actually, with the strategic end state at the very beginning of this thing. He said it to myself and Secretary Austin and many others. He's also said it many, many times in public forums and in speeches. It's very clear. The strategic end state is the global rules-based international order that was put in place in 1945 is upheld. How do you do that? How do you know you've achieved that end state? You achieve that end state when Ukraine remains a free, sovereign, independent country with the territory intact. And then you know the rules base was upheld. If that rules base order, which is in its 80th year, if that goes out the window, then be very careful. We'll be doubling our defense budgets at that point because that will introduce not an era of great power competition, that'll begin an era of great power conflict. And that'll be extraordinarily dangerous for the whole world. Ukraine is a fight for Ukraine that's existential for Ukraine, but for the rest of us, it's a much bigger and important national interest that's fundamental to the United States, to Europe, and global security.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you for your service to our country and for being here today. The United States has a vested national security interest in taking decisive action to reduce our dependence upon China, particularly as it relates to military readiness. I have concerns that our military is dangerously reliant upon China when it comes to procuring raw materials like plastic and rubber that our defense industrial base needs to produce defense articles. We must have a whole-of-government strategy in place to free our military from relying upon goods coming from Communist China as soon as physically possible. In FY23 Defense Appropriation Bill, I worked to include language directing the Department of Defense to issue a report outlining the department's increase of domestic sourcing of plastic and plastic alternatives. Secretary Austin, do you have an update on the status of this report or an expectation when this report will be made available to Congress?
I'm sorry, sir, I missed
An increase from the production of plastic, domestic sourcing of plastic or plastic alternatives for the defense industry?
I'll take that question for the record, sir, and get back to you. But I would like to tell you some of the things that we are doing along the lines of strengthening our supply chains and making sure that we onshore capability. Because I absolutely agree with you. This needs to be a whole of government effort. I want to thank you and the rest of Congress for what you've done for the CHIPS, in support of the CHIPS Act. I think that'll make a really big difference. In this budget, we're asking you for $2.6 billion to invest in microelectronics. We're investing $125 million in batteries and electronics. We're going after critical minerals, and you know, I've asked for $253 million to be focused on that as well. And things like casting and forging, $177 million for that. So I absolutely agree with you, sir, that we have to do a lot to make sure that we can, we have independence, we can trust our supply chains, and so we're going to continue to work with the industry to do that.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I was pleased to read that the Biden administration is working to expedite the delivery of 31 Abrams tanks to our allies in Ukraine, the arrival which will undoubtedly provide the Ukrainians with a technological advantage over their Russian counterparts. I was disappointed, however, to find the president's budget including funding for 34 Abrams tanks, just 3 more than we're sending to the Ukrainians. This reduction in funding is a concerning departure from previous years in which Congress has indicated continued support funding for a full battalion of tanks. This is for either of you gentlemen. You know, if considering a commitment we've made to Ukraine in regards to transfer of the Abrams tanks, can you offer insight to explain the justification behind this reduction in funding?
We're actually funding a Ukrainian battalion of tanks, which reflects the number that you've seen, sir.
We've heard at length about the need to bolster the military-industrial supply base. Could a reduction in funding for the tanks program not make it more difficult to make sure we have the supply base to effectively scale up production for this and future needs?
So what we'll do for these tanks that we're providing to Ukraine, if that's the question, is that we're taking tanks out of our stock, right, and rebuilding those tanks so that they are exportable, and so that actually will come out of drawdown versus new purchase.
But I understand and appreciate that, but are we not securing new tanks in the process from the supply chain here in America? Because it was a reduction from the amount that were authorized.
There are, it's just not at the rates. I'll have to go back and check with General McConnell and the Army staff, but the tank plant at Lima, Ohio is continuing its operations. It's not being shut down, and if you have information it's being shut down, that would be new news to me. The tank production line is going to be kept open. It's necessary to keep it open. It's a unique thing. It's not, tanks aren't produced in the commercial world, so we've got to keep that line open because tanks, although there's going to be a future operating environment, you're going to have the introduction of robotics, you're going to have all kinds of other things in the future with artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. But tanks have value, and they have value today, and you're seeing it play out in Ukraine, and they're going to have value for many, many years to come. So I don't know of any intent to shut down that Lima, Ohio tank production line.
Well, I didn't mean to bring it up as a Buckeye thing, but the fact that we're actually slowing it down, as you know, sir.
Yeah, slowing down.
The problem with that is that you have the pieces and parts, the mom and pop people who produce on that supply line, and if they're slowing down or being shut down because we're not doing that, that slows down our ability to ramp up, God forbid the need be.
Sure.
Thank you for your answers. I look forward to getting a copy of that report soon, Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I wanted to start where some of my colleagues have in thanking you for your service, but specifically for your testimony and honesty when you sat with the January 6th committee. Your commitment to the truth, your honesty and availability is only matched by your commitment to protecting our democracy and protecting this country. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I wanted to also echo the concerns that Ranking Member DeLauro and Representative Ruppersberger said about some of the cuts in defense spending and how they would negatively impact our national security. General, how could a reduction in military funding impact the joint force and our ability to provide credible deterrence, specifically to PRC activities in the Indo-Pacific?
It would impact several different ways. If you think of the domains of space, cyber, land, sea, and air, and undersea, right now we've got, roughly speaking, about 120,000 troops west of the international date line of all branches of service. And we have at sea at a moment in time, probably 20, 30 surface combatant ships. We've got subsurface ships, submarines out there as well. You've got Marines conducting exercise in Okinawa and beyond. You've got Army forces with their long-range task forces. You've got the Marine Littoral regiments. All the trainings conducted. There was 24,000 live fires conducted last year by just the Army and the Marine Corps, not just in the Pacific, but worldwide. So that level of training would be reduced. That level of operational tempo would be reduced, and that level of what Secretary Austin has in the National Defense Strategy of day-to-day campaigning, if you will, which acts as a great deterrent. So I think if you reduce all that, you're going to force us to reduce our op tempo, force us to do less Taiwan Straits transits, less freedom of navigation, less patrolling of the air, less ISR. Everything will be less, which will increase risk, increase danger, and send the wrong message. And the probable result will be an acceleration of what could be some sort of aggressive moves in the future by China or other countries.
Secretary Austin, I wanted to thank both you and the General for your work in addressing domestic violent extremism in the department. In December of 22, the Inspector General released a report that, among other things, talked about the effectiveness of policy and programs to prevent and respond to supremacist and extremist activity in the military. The report found 200 allegations of prohibited activity, including 146 allegations of supremacist and extremist activities. On its face, this is a concerning number, but the IG report also stated that the department had decentralized and non-standardized systems to collect and track this data. For example, one of the quotes in the report was that the Army's total allegation data does not reflect its total number of allegations, just the total number of allegations with a follow-on status. What steps has the department taken, Mr. Secretary, to standardize the collection of allegations of extremism by service members since the release of that report?
Well, we continue to make sure that our leadership is doing the right thing to first of all, our troops understand how to recognize certain types of behavior, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what the military won't tolerate, and I think that's a first step in making sure that we're doing the right things. But we are emphasizing that we do have the right means in place, the right methods in place to accurately reflect or collect, reports that are being rendered. And I would also say that, you've heard me say this before, 99.9% of our troops are doing the right thing each and every day. They're focused on accomplishing their mission. Our leaders are focused on their task at hand, their missions. And you don't get to be a ready force, the ready force that we are, that the chairman described, unless your leaders are focused on the right things. And while, making sure that we don't have extremist behavior in our ranks is important, it is not, it hasn't consumed the force, a focus on this. It just enables us to do the things that we're supposed to do, and it makes us better. So.
And allows us to look at tools to help make the force better, correct?
Right.
General, any other thoughts?
Yeah, in the year you're talking about, 183 out of 2.1 million were referred for extremist behavior. And we have means and mechanisms that can discipline the force that are not necessarily available in civil society. We're a very disciplined force. We don't tolerate extremism of any kind, left, right, in between. It doesn't matter. No extremists in the ranks, period. We're not a political military. We're an apolitical military, and we intend to stay that way. So there's no extremism tolerated. When we find it, we discover it, we refer it, and we take appropriate disciplinary action. And as the Secretary said, out of that 2.1 million, 99.9.9.9 are in there every single day trying to do the right thing for the right reasons to protect this country. And they wake up every morning, try to better themselves, better the unit, and better this country.
I completely agree with that, but the report also mentioned 183, which is the accurate number, but there might be more that just had not had the follow-on status.
There may be, but I would say it's relatively small numbers. I've been doing this for a long time. When I was a lieutenant and captain, we had extremists then too. Secretary Austin, when he was a young officer, he had some experiences at Fort Bragg with extremists. So this isn't something new. We discipline the force. We don't tolerate it. When we find it, we punish it, we get it out. But that shouldn't smear the entire force. This force is a disciplined, dedicated, patriotic force that loves America and will fight and die for it.
Agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your accession to your position. Welcome to our subcommittee, Secretary Austin and General Milley. General Milley, thank you for your service to our country. Both of you have distinguished yourselves in your service. I'm very proud of both you, and I know my constituents are too. I wanted to say my top priority is Ukraine right now. And Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you'll have a closed-door session on that before we move into markup. But I just wanted to request that, if possible. General Milley, as a follow-up to the Liberty Road Initiative, I would greatly appreciate an individual we could work with on your staff somewhere in the rather large staffing at the Department of Defense. We've been unable to do that effectively. Then I wanted to follow up on something Congressman Cuellar talked about, the severe illicit narcotics activity that is really destabilizing in his region and frankly having an impact across our country. And I just wanted to put on the record for those who are listening, there's a great book called Dreamland by Sam Quinones, and who tracks the economics of what's going on following the passage of NAFTA in 1993 and the wipeout of the Mexican white corn market and the springing up in all those places, Jalisco, Tamaulipas, et cetera, of the planting of heroin and moving into other drugs. It's quite sobering to read, and I just place that on the record for those who really care about this. Until we solve that, the abject poverty that resulted from that, we're not going to solve the problem, and I don't know if the government of Mexico is capable of solving it. Secretary Austin, I wanted to ask if you might help us set up a meeting with the folks who are handling the ramp-up of additional work and defense industrial-based activities in your department. I come from Manufacturing America. We helped save the M1, the Abrams tank plant. We were told, oh, we'll never have another land war. What do we need that for? We had to save the tank capability of this country. We had to save the strategic petroleum reserve of this country because there were people who were willing to wipe it out. Those of us who come from Manufacturing America understand what it takes. I would be very grateful so we could learn more about the funding, the staffing, and the current authorities if they need to be expanded. Thank you for listening to that. And finally, for either gentleman today, in terms of hybrid warfare, I'm very interested in more detail on the impact of the internet on communications and how U.S. forces are working to overcome communication problems with host nations and the impact that the internet is having on creating disruptive activities, false information, and so forth. That I'd like to know more detail about that as we move forward in terms of meeting threats to our security globally.
Well, thank you, and thanks for all your support. And certainly, I'll make sure my staff reaches out to yours, and we provide you access to the people who are working on these issues with the industrial base for us.
We have a manufacturing task force here, sir, on the House side. We're very interested.
Sure.
Thank you.
With respect to the internet and information, how information impacts operations. We've seen over the years that in terms of transnational terrorist activity, people that have been recruited and actually encouraged to take action over the internet and radicalized over the internet. That kind of thing continues to we continue to see that. But even in a kind of a conventional fight, there's still a lot of activity that adversaries will put on the internet to create a number of different types of effects, and we see this, as you know, with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and we have to be we have to be active in that space, and we also have to enable our partners to be active in that space. So this is really important to us, and it will continue to evolve, and so there's significant activity in those spaces, and they do directly affect the fight. And let me see if Mark wants to add anything.
Yeah, Congresswoman, first, on the Liberty Road thing, I'll circle back with you and make sure that we're closing loops on that whole project. And I was very proud to be there with you and as part of that over in Poland. On the communications piece, communications is fundamental, obviously, to the conduct of military operations. It is one of the key pieces of our joint warfighting concept, which will be doctrine here this summer. The JADC2 piece is part of that. So our from a defensive standpoint, our communication systems have got to become more resilient and less susceptible to either jamming or spoofing or any other kind of interference or intercepting and collecting off of our signal systems. I think we're pretty good, but we need to get better. In terms of broader implications, the social media and the advent of social media, if you think about it, the iPhone just came out in 2008. So we are really at the beginning of a proliferation of all kinds of information, all kinds of platforms out there that can spew all kinds of accurate data and inaccurate data. And that's something that we all have to come to grips with because there's a lot of stuff out there in the internet and social media that is false. And we have to be wary of that because of misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. We know factually that adversary states are using bots on a very frequent basis to try to influence our elections, influence elections in Europe, influence elections in other countries, undermine, create divisiveness. Where there's already divisiveness in a society, adversary states may try to pour on with social media and make it worse, even though it's just a single person in a foreign city who's doing this through some means and mechanisms. But they can take a single issue and blow it up and make it much more divisive than it would have been otherwise. So there's a lot of issues with social media and how it's being used for information transmission, disinformation transmission, and I think there's a lot of things that we have to come to grips with. From a military standpoint, though, for us, it's really just a communication system that we need to build, make it resilient, so that we can effectively command, control, and coordinate during combat operations.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ladies, time has expired. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service to the country, a lifetime of service, and we thank you very much. Let me bring up a topic that's the elephant in the room, and that's competition with China. How do you assess the Chinese president's visit to Moscow recently, and how does that play in the larger world stage on our competition with China? Mr. Secretary.
I'll begin, sir, and then certainly offer the chairman, with your permission, a chance to comment. Certainly, this is it's troubling to see that Putin attacked his neighbor in an unprecedented way and seeks to change the border and access his neighbor's property or sovereign territory. So Xi's visit to Putin and remaining there for a couple of days, I think, sends a very troubling message, a message of support. We don't see them providing any material support to Russia right now, but we're watching this very, very closely. If they were to go down that path, I think it would be very troubling for the international community. But certainly, just showing support by his presence there, I think, is very troubling. I think that it's been described as a marriage of convenience. Putin doesn't have any allies or partners that he can turn to in the international community, and so China is willing to continue to develop that relationship. That's very, very interesting. But it's troubling that what we've seen. Again, it will be even more troubling if Xi decides to provide material support to Russia. It would prolong the conflict and certainly broaden the conflict potentially, not only in the region but globally.
General?
So, Congressman Rogers, thanks for the question. Look at, China is a serious, probably the most serious geostrategic adversary the United States is facing today and will be facing through mid-century and perhaps the entire century. And if you were a historian in the year, a century from now, the story of this century will likely be, the geostrategic story is going to likely be what was the relationship between the United States and China? Did it end up in a war or not? And I think that we need to be really careful as we go forward to make sure that our military and our capabilities are way stronger than anything China can field. That's fundamental to deterrence. We don't want a great power war with China. We want to prevent that, and the way to prevent it is a strong, powerful military, a demonstrated will to use it if necessary, and that they clearly and unambiguously understand it. What we see in China, what we see in terms of a nation state over the last 40-plus years, since Deng Xiaoping introduced his reforms in 1979, is an enormous growth in wealth, the greatest growth in wealth of any country, to include all the United States back in the 1800s. This is an enormous growth in wealth, an enormous shift in power globally. And in the wake of that wealth is coming this military. Their military has advanced from a peasant-based infantry army in 1979 to a world-class military that is a near peer of the United States. They are not better than we are. They have a long way to go for that, but they are closing the gap very, very quickly. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that we remain number one at all times. That will help keep the peace. If we somehow fall behind, that'll become very dangerous, in my opinion.
So the goal, sir, is to deter China from making an ill-advised decision going forward. And you've heard me say a number of times that I don't think a military action against Taiwan is either imminent or unavoidable. I think that that the way that we keep things in the right place is to make sure that we're able to talk to each other. You've seen me reach out a number of times to my counterpart. I'll continue to do that. I think military leaders should be able to talk to each other, to manage escalation, and to determine intent, and a number of other things. But I think this communication is really, really important. So again, I do not think that military action is imminent. But certainly, as the chairman pointed out, we have to make sure that we remain a combat credible force, and we'll do everything within our power to make sure we do that.
Well, in the question of competition with China, undoubtedly, we are at a crucial moment here. We are beginning to lose our critical competitive edge in multiple domains. I'm interested to know, in your budget request, what is needed to reverse this trend that we're on?
Well, you see us, number one, investing in our posture, and so the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, we've allocated or requested for that initiative some $9.1 billion this year. That's a 40% increase over what we asked for last year. That will help us, improve infrastructure that provides us the ability to position our troops forward in theater so that we can deter much further forward. You've seen us ask for $61 billion to support and maintain our dominance in the air domain. $48 billion in combat effective naval forces, and some $13+ billion for our effective ground forces. And we're investing in the capabilities that support our warfighting concepts that support our strategy. So there's a lot in this budget that's focused on this particular challenge. And again, we will continue to invest in the years going forward to build upon the things that we're asking for today and doing today in theater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I have three things I want to talk about briefly, but I'm going to have to go fairly quickly through them if I could in the time allowed. Chairman Milley, I want to follow up with something you said and just try to add some clarity to it. When we talk about, and I want you to know, in fairness, I'm one of the members who is becoming more and more concerned about our efforts in Ukraine and where that actually leads us. And have we applied any of the lessons of the last 20 years, and can we apply those to Ukraine? And so when you talk about our goals there, our international, I'm paraphrasing, international rule of law preserved, Ukraine a free and independent nation with its territory preserved, does that include Crimea?
Yeah, what the president has said and the guidance he's given out is, and publicly as well as Secretary Blinken, Mr. Sullivan, others, is that is for a decision for Ukraine to decide. Our task is to help Ukraine defend itself. The United States is not at war with Russia, even though Russia tries to portray that. We are helping a country defend itself, defend its territorial integrity and its people.
Well, and I think that's where this becomes a very different situation for us, and I would say a very much more dangerous situation. If we say our goal is to reclaim all of the eastern Donetsk region, and then including Crimea and including the land bridge, the evidence and the intelligence and experience is really clear that is a very, very different thing than what we're talking about.
And I've said that publicly, that goal, which is really a maximalist goal set by President Zelensky publicly, that is an extraordinarily difficult goal to achieve militarily.
And I appreciate that, and we'll have more time to talk about that. You know, the interesting thing about these hearings is we often come with kind of esoteric issues, things that are kind of personal to our district maybe, or to our state. And this is a little bit like that, but not really. It's actually very broad and strategic. And I think also in meeting our conversations with your staff, it appears that both of you are supportive of this, and that's the Office of Strategic Capital. The $115 million was allocated. And I have talked with dozens and dozens, and I know you have too, dozens of small companies, but you know, some other larger ones as well, who want to work with the Department of Defense, but they just can't get through the contracting process. Mr. Undersecretary, you have the worst job in the world as a comptroller and the person who's got I think God looks at the acquisition process and says, it's too hard, I can't do it. It's a very difficult thing, but this Office of Strategic Capital, I believe, would bring billions of dollars of market money, private money, to the Department of Defense in a way that just we can't do now because it's so difficult and they get so frustrated. And either of you would like to respond to that, I'd appreciate it if you have views on that. But if not, we'd like to continue to work with the office as we try to make this actual reality.
This is really important to us, and thanks for your support. I want to thank the chairman for his support as well. We've had a couple of conversations on this initiative. I want to applaud Heidi Shu's efforts in this area. She and I and a couple of others sat down, many months ago and really focused on the problem of trying to get small companies into this, into the business here. And how do we break down barriers, and how do we make it, how do we incentivize investment? And so that's what this is about. We really are interested in making sure that it begins to move in the right direction. We partnered with the Small Business Bureau, and so again, we're optimistic about it, and thanks for your support.
Well, and Secretary, thank you, because I think it could really make a difference. And some of the technology they would make available to our warfighters would make a difference to them. They've got things that we need. We need to find a way to get it, to get us access to it. And the last comment, if I could, very quickly. I come from a family of military. I'm three generations now, all of my brothers, my father, et cetera. And one of the reasons that I joined the military is because my dad did. And if he had ever indicated to me, you know, I don't know if you'd like it, or I'm not sure it's a good thing anymore, I would never have done it. And there's a culture here that I think we've I don't want to say broken, but we've strained it. In general, or Chairman Milley, I think you've seen it in the Army in the sense of our recruitment goals. I mean, 15,000 soldiers short, 25% short of our goal. And we can talk about salaries and compensation, and that's part of it, but you both know that that's not the primary reason someone joins the military. They do because of that culture and that wanting to serve. And we've broken that somehow between fathers and sons. And I just wondered, my time is up, and maybe we can talk about it again, but what has changed culturally to make it so we're not meeting our recruiting goals, and how do we address that?
Thanks for the question. Well, first, the services are meeting the recruiting goals with the exception of the Army. The Army ran into some real headwinds there, and they're trying to dig their way out of that. Secondly, we are at a 50-year high, actually, since the all-volunteer military began right after Vietnam, 50-year high on retention. So that should tell us something. What that tells us is that those that are in uniform are very satisfied with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and they feel fulfilled that they're serving a cause better than themselves, they're bettering their own lives, et cetera. So those are on the plus side. For the recruiting piece, though, we are in a difficult recruiting period. There's no question about it. I think for sure COVID plays a role in that. We know that only in terms of the demographics of our society, only about 23% of America's youth between 17 and 25 even qualify to get into the military, and of them, only 9% show a propensity to serve. We know that about 78% of those of us in uniform have military family members in uniform, like yourself. Both my mother and father served in World War II, and grandparents before them, uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins, all of them served at one time or another. And that's true with you, that's true with Secretary Austin, that's true with many of us in this room. So 78% of those that have familiarity with the military tend to join the military. So contact time, familiarity with the military, meeting troops, et cetera. We also know that the Army did a study, and I don't know if it's been made available or not, but I was briefed on it, and one of the things in the study that comes out in terms of a barrier to join for kids coming out of high school, et cetera, is the fear of being injured or the fear of getting hurt, PTSD. There's a lot of stuff out there about rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment. Those sorts of things are out there that have mischaracterized, actually, the military in many, many ways. And so it creates a little barrier for those that are considering joining. In addition to that, there's probably about 20 or 30 factors. But I think one of the biggest ones, actually, is the lack of kids going to school in the last couple of years has prevented our recruiters from getting into high schools and having contact time. And we know right off the bat that drops recruiting rates if you don't have contact time with recruiters. There's a lot of reasons. I wouldn't say that there's one particular reason. There's a lot of reasons why it's challenging right now. But those that are coming into service are doing it for the same reasons that you did, which is to serve your country, serve a cause greater than yourself, try to better yourself, develop certain skills. They're coming in for certain pays and benefits, to be sure, but no one comes in the military just for the money. That's not why you come in. You come in to serve your country, protect the Constitution, and hand it off to the next generation.
And thanks for your service, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ranking Member McCollum, you have any closing statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to submit a few questions for the record on climate change and resilience and Arctic resources. Thank you both for your testimony, and I think it was well said by Congressman Stewart to talk about family and service. My family goes back on both sides of the Revolutionary War, but now we've had a gap in this generation. So there is something that we need to do to make sure people embrace and being welcome. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your courtesy and for the way everybody got their questions in.
Yeah, also want to thank both of you for your service. General, we've known each other for many years and ran each other over the years. I'm sure we'll continue to know each other. I respect your service, and I'm sure we'll be working closely together until you run through the tape in September. So thank you again for your service. Obviously, I'm concerned about this budget. I made that clear. I think we're going to work together to plus this up somewhat to make sure we meet the requirements. We'll be working with our colleagues both here on the other side of the aisle and in the Senate to see if we can come up with a number that will meet the needs to protect this country and lead it into the future. So thank you, and we are adjourned.